All right, everyone. Today, we'll have a special show. We are talking about the Momentum Awards. We're going to do a review of 2022. But before we get started, Rui, how are you feeling today? Because last week
George.
You were out, I was also out. What's up?
Well, I'm much better, thank you. I'm just recovering from COVID, my first COVID experience. So this is my 11th day since my first symptoms appeared. I was in New York City when my first symptoms appeared. So
do you know where you caught it?
To be honest, no. I have some ideas where it could happen, like of course the subway. We took a bus and a train because we traveled from New York City to Boston, and I was not using a face mask in neither of those, transportations. So I don't know, but I think that Anais, my wife, she got it first, but she didn't develop like really clear symptoms. And then I got it from her, and my symptoms were much clearer. Like clearly it was COVID, like those headaches and lots of body ache, a lot of coughing.
That's a serious virus. Despite the fact
Yes.
that you're vaccinated, right? Like you're fully vaccinated.
Yeah, I have 3 COVID vaccines. So 3 shots, and still.
Sure. Do you know where Anais caught it? Any theories there?
Yeah, somewhere in New York City.
New York City. Okay. So not on the flight? You don't think it was on the flight?
No, because she started having, it could be in the flight, but I have heard that with these variations, or I don't know what's the term.
Yeah, variations or strains.
Yeah, or strains. These last COVID strains, you get sick rather quickly after you get infected. So basically her first symptoms, which were very mild, right? But like we could say this was like 5 days, 6 days after we arrived to New York City. So I think it's more probable that she caught it in somewhere in New York City. For the record, like it's amazing the amount of people that we heard coughing, in the subway, wherever we went, museums, like you heard people like with flu symptoms, especially coughing, a lot of coughing.
And that used to be normal, right? Like, I think that there's now this, like, everyone has developed a sensitivity around, like, hearing people cough in public. I think it's a new phenomenon where you kind of, like, go through your day and you, like, scan for anyone coughing. And, like, there's this new sensitivity. Like, when I go throughout my day and I hear someone cough, I, like, turn and, like, look and, like, like, it's kind of, I think that people just have developed this, like, new sensitivity around coughing and detecting symptoms. It's I think it's one of the, I guess, like psychological phenomenons that have like now I think manifested themselves after the pandemic. It's because it used to be normal. Like we used to go through winter, everyone is coughing and no one really cared about it that much, but now it seems to be like a big deal to hear people cough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's going to take a few years before we do not get worried about hearing someone coughing. But yeah, I just almost got 3 years without COVID, right? Without getting like a positive result. But, I feel happy that I know how it is and it's not as bad. Yeah. So
it's nothing that you have to be worried about in the future. Kind of like
you've had definitely.
Yeah. I think everyone is going to get it eventually, right? It's
Yeah. I agree with you. And I think there are still people who are like, in my opinion, too careful. Like they still are too extreme in the measures they take to avoid getting infected with COVID. So I think it's difficult to keep going that way. So get vaccinated and like trying to live a healthy lifestyle. I think it's today the smartest way to go in the long term.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's good that you're feeling better. In case you do cough during the episode, that's just something that the listeners will have to keep just accept. Like so, no worries. Like and just you might hear some coughing every now and then. That's because Rui is recovering. I also had like a slight flu, so my nose is slightly congested. But we're going to power through this episode because, as I mentioned, today we're looking at the year 2022, and we're going to talk about sort of what shaped the year of 2022. So let's get started with this.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
I'm first going to quickly mention the categories. So we have the best book the best app, the most important trend in politics and economics, the most exciting startup, the best investment, and then the most important general trend, the ultimate momentum award. So those are the 7 categories that we are going to talk about. And this is going to be a review. So we're looking back at 2022. So let's get started.
Best book in 2022, George. So I read a lot of blogs and you know, different newspapers and magazines, trying to find like which 2022 book I believe is the one to read. And I found this book called Stay True by, I think it's Hua Zhu. Basically, it's, the name is Hua, last name Hsu. So I'm pronouncing it like Huashu or Huasu. This book called Stay True, basically the author questions the possibility of meaning in tragedy, right? Let me read you a little bit about like the book story. So it is some sort of like an autobiography, right? So in college, Sue became unlikely friends with Ken, whose mainstream tastes and interests couldn't have been more different from his. And Ken was murdered early on one morning in 1998 by some robbers, right? So the author describes like the aftermath with, you know, like the devastating emotional consequences that this event had, right? So Stay True is definitely a tragic book, but it also succeeds a chronicle, right, of the insecurities of like youth and like college life in the 1990s. And I think the author like manages really well, like you know, using like warmth and humor. And I think it's a book that at the end helps us to have some tools to understand how, for example, friendship and a sense of community is so important when we live tragedies. And I think it's really important in 2022 after the last 2 really difficult years, George. You know, a lot of people have lost, you know, friends and family in COVID. I'm thinking about the amount of tragedy that people in Ukraine are experiencing. Of course, other countries that have lots of suffering too. So I think that it is a great book to read because it helps us to build a bridge between experiencing tragedy and finding hope and finding a sense of how to use that tragic event as a catapult or as a ladder or as a bridge to growing as a person. So that's my recommendation for 2022, a must-read book.
Must-read book, okay. Stay True. Stay True. The author's name was?
Hua Zhu. So it is Hua, Hua, and then last name Hsu. So I'm pronouncing it like Zhu, but maybe it's Su. I don't know.
Sounds very interesting. Sounds like a very deep book. Sounds like kind of like achieving emotional anti-fragility. Yeah, sounds definitely good. All right, let me tell you my book, and it's not a book, so I'm already cheating on this very first category. Because I was thinking about different books. I was like thinking about like what were the books that I read this year, and I read a few different books, but actually I also didn't manage to finish that many books. Like I read like a few different books, like a few different chapters, but I was like actually struggling to figure out what book I like finished reading. My run up is Atomic Habits, which is, you know, the James Clear famous book on a well-known book already. But I actually thought it was like really, really long and should have been just an extensive blog post. So I would actually not recommend it too much, but I think a lot of people like it. So maybe that's a book that you could read. For me, it's going to be a blog post. So for me, it's going to be a blog post, which was called Generative AI Begins, or Generative Tech Begins by NFX, the venture capital firm. Okay. And I think it's basically the first articulation of what generative artificial intelligence is going to look like and the impact it's going to have. And I feel like that essay, that blog post, basically just kicked off this frenzy of AI tools. I mean, it started building up during the year, but I think that they were the first ones to really articulate it. And I'm not sure if they were the ones to coin the term generative tech or generative artificial intelligence, but I think they were the first ones to write a long blog post about it, explaining it. And it's a very, very good blog post. So we'll put it in the notes. Generative tech begins. And it basically kind of like explains or like just maps out with the opportunities that are going to arise with generative tech, with advances in artificial intelligence. And basically they're explaining that if Web 1 was read only, Web 2 was read and write, and now with generative tech, it's read, write, generate. And I think that this particular article seemed to have had an immense impact on the tech ecosystem, to the extent where we're at the end of the blog post, and I'm paraphrasing here, but at the end of the blog post, they basically say, like, whatever you're doing, just stop and start with this. Like, this is kind of like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I would say that a lot of people are probably describing this particular moment to the iPhone moment of 2007 was the iPhone, right?
Yeah.
So, and I do think that there's a real parallel, and we've already seen like a few of these companies now emerge that are making $1 million a day in revenue, with generative tech. And like, it's definitely, it's just the advances that have been made this year are just pushing the boundaries to what we thought was possible. There's so many interesting tools that I've now already used. I think that's a big difference if we talk about Web3 and cryptocurrencies compared to generative AI. I've actually started playing around, like everyone has started playing around with generative AI, and there's like real things that you're doing now with generative AI. It's supporting your work, your creativity, etc. So that's my, not book, but just blog post of the year. So sorry, I'm cheating, but it has to be Generative Tech Begins by NFX.
I love it. And I think it makes so much sense. Have you noticed the hype in the last, I don't know, few weeks with Chat GPT?
Of course. And I think we could do a whole episode just talking about that. But I think I've already played around with it. I've also I've played around with a few different tools to do AI generated avatars and profile pictures and stuff like that. So yeah, and I did that like a few weeks ago actually. So yeah, of course, it's difficult not to notice the hype and the excitement, and it's real. Like, I think so.
Like some big names in the like tech startup world are saying like, wow, like Chat GTP could be, some sort of next Google, right?
Yeah, replacing Google search. Correct.
Yes, crazy. I mean, and I didn't know that I think Chat GTP was developed by OpenAI.
OpenAI, which is funded by Microsoft.
Yeah, and Elon Musk too, right? So Elon Musk is involved with OpenAI.
Maybe I don't know. I know that the main company behind it is Microsoft, and I think that one interesting play here could be Microsoft integrating GTP3 with Bing. The Microsoft search engine. Yeah. So I think that there's like an interesting play there from a strategic point of view. I think Microsoft might integrate that into Bing search, and then Bing could actually become a serious competitor. And I mean that it is actually a product that is being used. I mean, it's difficult to understand and imagine that some people use Bing to search for things rather than Google, but it is, some people do use they do have good user numbers, like hundreds of millions of people. So I think it's exciting. So and definitely. I think that this blog post was part of it. So next category. Apps, the best app of 2022, and for me it has to be Gas. I don't know if you've heard of it. I haven't used it. I think it might only be available in the US. Have you heard of Gas?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to do like a super quick summary of what Gas is, but basically Gas was, these, probably you experienced this a few years ago on Facebook, where you could rank different things and or rank your peers, like your classmates, on who's most likely to become rich or most likely to become president. Stuff like that. Do you remember that there were a few apps that were running on Facebook?
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So it's basically Gas is like a peer-to-peer ranking for teenagers, and they launched, and it became sort of they prepared it for like a year more or less, the development of the app and everything, but then they launched and it became an overnight success. So they did like a geofenced launch somewhere in like a suburb, somewhere near Atlanta. And so many interesting things happened with this app. Basically, there was like a misinformation attack that targeted the app that originated from China, where there was misinformation being spread that apparently if you download this app, you're going to get kidnapped because you have to like give your location and stuff like that. So there was this massive misinformation campaign launched from China, probably, TikTok or, there are like a few other apps that are popular with teenagers. So, but like there was this massive misinformation app and it was like on the news and everything. And then they had to basically, I think they even got like blocked from the App Store. They had to rebrand, and that's when they landed on the name Gas, and they had to do all these different things to get rid of these misinformation attacks. And this app made like millions, like we're talking about like I think $10 million in revenue in 3 months, because basically you had all these different categories, like who has the most beautiful eyes in your classroom or like in your school, etc. And teenagers basically had to pay in order to see who voted for them.
Okay.
And that was the monetization model, and it worked. And it's actually pretty expensive. I think the pricing was like $7.50 per week.
Wow,
or something like that.
Super expensive.
Yeah. And the founder is Nikita Beer, and basically I was following him throughout this whole story, and he tweeted like half a year ago, like, I'm going to launch an app that's going to make $10 million in 3 months. Like, he called a shot. Like, he basically said, that's what I'm going to do. And he had launched apps before, and he actually launched the exact same app on top of Facebook like 10 years ago, and was acquired by Facebook 10 years ago, or more or less 10 years ago. Then he said, I'm just going to do the same thing again. And he did it. So it was like really well executed as well. I think it's so difficult to pull this off, and to pull it off twice, it's just, shows that he really knows his stuff. So I think it's such an exciting story. And also I like that it's kind of like a positive thing, because like mainly positive categories. It's like, who is like the most handsome person, who is the nicest person, and who is the like most likely to become a millionaire, most likely to become president, stuff like that, So it's like kind of like a positive thing for teenagers as well. And I just liked it. And so Gas is my app of 2022.
Okay, interesting. I really like it. I'll look for it. So mine is probably much more simple and boring. Still, I think I have a great point for why I think it's the best app for 2022. And a lot of listeners will definitely already, or watchers will definitely know it. It's called Calm, which is one of the main meditation apps right now. But why I think it's such an important app right now. So I remember a couple of years ago listening to this Tim Ferriss, the author of 4 Hour Work Week.
Of course.
So Tim Ferriss has this podcast called Tribe of Mentors. I don't know if you have heard it. Basically, he started that podcast like sending up a bunch of questions to people that he admires in some way or another, right? So
isn't it a book? I think there's a book. Yeah. I thought it was a book.
I think so.
But he also did a podcast?
Yes.
Separate podcast? Like a separate podcast from the Tim Ferriss show? Okay.
Yes. And actually I think you find it as a different podcast from the Tim Ferriss show. So, and basically what he does there is that he asks a bunch of people that he considers mentors to record themselves with their answers to the answers that Tim Ferriss asks them. So one of these questions was like, what do you think it's like one of the key factors in your success, right? What would you say is like something really important in becoming who you are today? And something that I noticed, George, was the like overwhelming amount of mentors that mention in some way of another either mindfulness or meditation. right?
Okay.
That always stuck with me. I heard this, I think, back in 2019, before the pandemic. But we do know for sure that the COVID-19 pandemic, and all what happened with this crisis, if that's the way we should call this event, has triggered a lot of stress. Like in some countries, we know that people are really unhappy. Let's think about China, right? Where they're still having lockdowns and they have very, very strict and tough COVID policies still in place. But what we were just mentioning a few minutes ago, like lots of people are still afraid of, getting in contact with someone who is maybe infected with COVID. And so the levels of stress and anxiety in our societies are really high. So at the end, I think that Calm is a great tool because I have been using it to start like developing the habit of meditation and trying to have a much, I think mindfulness, it's a great tool to manage, both stress, anxiety, but also help you to get under control, all that mental energy and mental activity that sometimes if you are not properly focused, it won't help you to get where you want in life. Right. So I think that there are several reasons to develop this. I don't know if it's like mindfulness skills, but I totally know. And I think there's lots of research that point to the fact that people who meditate with frequency, use meditation and try to have some sort of mindfulness, they have lower levels of stress and anxiety, but it's also helping them to be much more focused. And I think on times where we have so much stimulus around us, like, I fight so much against not opening Instagram every now and then, like it's some sort of addictive, opening Twitter, opening different social media platforms.
Twitter. Twitter is a difficult one.
Twitter is a really difficult one, especially after I'm finding it much more difficult not to open Twitter after Elon Musk took over. I don't know. It's like gossip, like this whole FTX debacle. This what has been happening with Sam Bankman-Fried. It's like my Mexican telenovela. So it's but it's all of these stimulus and all these opportunities to not get focused on what's important to get done to achieve your goals. I think it's one of the main problems right now with entrepreneurs and founders and business people or like almost everyone is suffering from this. So I think Calm.
I know quite
definitely.
Surprisingly, I actually know quite a few very high performing entrepreneurs who've raised millions and millions of dollars and seem to. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to know exactly what's going on in a startup, but they seem to be really doing quite well. And some of them are not on Twitter. And like
that's crazy.
Tech, also, I met a guy who lives in San Francisco. Like he has a team in San Francisco. Like, so he's between San Francisco and New York. So, like in the epicenter, in the eye of the storm, so to speak, and doesn't have Twitter. And has raised over $100 million for his tech startup. It's not on Twitter. So
yeah.
So what is your meditation practice?
So basically, what I'm doing right now with meditation,
routine, kind of. Mm-hmm.
So let me tie this to Calm. Why I think Calm is the best meditation or mindfulness app right now. First, it's basically free. I mean, for beginners, it can be free, and it's really designed for people who have no experience with meditation, George. So I think that's like it's really important when you want to achieve some sort of change to make it really smooth and really easy. And I think Calm helps you with this. So basically, Anais and I started having meditation with the app when we were at our bed at night, right? Just before getting to sleep. So we just starting like, listening to, because it helps you by a guided meditation. And then of course you can pay money to have like much more complex services within the app. But I think it's pretty easy for adults. And something which I think is wonderful, and I think it needs to start being part of the conversation related to children and the welfare of children. Like I think that just think about your children, your daughters, how it's going to be life for them in 20 years in terms of so many options to get distracted with. I mean, it's even difficult to imagine how it's going to be in 15,
the
20
attention
years.
economy.
Yes.
Two very
George,
scary words.
Attention economy.
Very scary words. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So I think that these kind of apps are really important, not just for adults, but also for children. And Calm is also suitable for children. So yeah, that's why I think it's my 2022 app. And right now what we're doing is spending a few minutes every night when we're at bed doing some meditation exercises. And I don't know if the term is visualization. Do you, right? So we are
visualization.
Also, yeah. So, and to be honest, we are seeing some important differences. So,
super interesting.
Yeah,
super interesting. I personally have never tried out meditation. What's your definition of meditation? Like, for example, the one thing that I do, I think, and I feel like it helps me to like kind of like start the day off the right way is go for a walk with my dogs, a 30-minute walk in the mountains, no phone, nothing. Like there's no distraction, and
that's
I'm just purely focused on.
To me,
that's meditation to me as well. Like, and I feel like I definitely feel the days where I go for that 30-minute walk in the morning, no distraction. It's the first thing I do. I get out of bed, go for the walk, no phone, no nothing. That's kind of my style of meditation. And I even like when I get to the top of or to the end point of my trail where then like turn around and circle back, I kind of like pause for a moment and just like look into the distance and like I just look onto the mountains. And that's kind of my meditative practice. And I personally feel like those days I'm way more productive and I feel more balanced and I feel like, the day has already started off really well.
Yeah.
And then I hate it when it's like raining or something like that because the trail like is completely muddy and it might kind of deter me from going on that walk. Yeah, that's kind of my form of meditation.
That's meditation to me. So I think meditation is any kind of practice or activity that in one way or another helps you to like clear your mind. And in some way, George, it helps you to improve your ability to focus on the present moment. I hope this makes sense, but sometimes I like to do some sort of gardening in San Gil. And I think it's meditation because I'm doing this like really manual, like it's an activity that involves my physical input a lot. And I don't need to think a lot in abstract terms. I'm just right there and focusing on that moment. So I like all my worries or everything that I'm always thinking about goes away and I'm just there, doing that. So yeah, definitely. So Calm, give it a try.
Awesome. All right. Our next category is going to be politics. So Rui, next category, politics. Go for it. What is your winner or most important political trend of 2022 in politics?
This is a tough one and probably one that it's gonna get me some critics. I mean, probably you have heard about all these, like the woke movement, like the more left-wing politics growing very strongly in the US and the Western world, the cancel culture. So maybe it's not like a political movement, but I like to mention Elon Musk and Twitter, right? I think that what Elon Musk is trying to achieve in terms of free speech and having this like forum, I don't know how could we like describe Twitter nowadays as maybe the most important platform.
Digital town space.
Yes.
A town square. Digital town square. Mm-hmm.
Digital Times Square. I love that concept, and I chose for like the political movement of 2022. Let's say it's for me the best political move in 2022. What just Elon Musk tried, and all the story behind how he purchased Twitter and what's happening within Twitter, because probably you have heard about how Elon Musk is exposing how U.S. government or U.S. politicians were bringing pressure to Twitter executives. So apparently there was some sort of censorship guided by, political ideology. So I just want to say that even if maybe in some topics I do not agree with Elon Musk, but I think that what he's doing with Twitter and what's he fighting for in terms of having tolerance and allowing both right wing and left wing or on the center to have like the same chance to get their message out in Twitter, I think that's critical, and that's why I chose him for best political move in 2022.
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny that you're calling like the acquisition of a tech firm a political trend, but it says a lot, right? Like, so basically, it's anti wokeness or like a rebalancing, and maybe even so. Like, technically, you're saying that the most important political trend is maybe like the depoliticalization of Twitter. Right?
Yes,
you could also say that it's like removing politics, which to some commentators here are probably going to say that it's exactly the opposite, right? Like, I think from the extreme left, Elon Musk is seen as someone who's now leaning more right. But I think ultimately what he's trying to achieve is neutrality, and is basically a new standard in freedom of speech without, there's always like a very, very thin line between free speech and basically, well, so how do I say this? Like, there's a thin line between free speech and allowing people to say anything that they want to say. Like, so I think that there's like there's two different categories, right? Like, there's free speech, and then there is still a type of speech that is not permitted even under absolutist free speech paradigm. So like hate speech is still not going to be permitted, etc. So I think that he's basically trying to create a new standard in what free speech is going to look like on Twitter. And we'll have to see how that actually pans out. Like, until now, I was kind of also looking forward to Twitter under Elon Musk and see what type of innovation he's going to roll out, etc. Until now, I've not been that impressed. And I think also that the app is deteriorating. Like, I think that there are more and more errors happening within the app. And I think that to some extent, his leadership style can definitely be criticized. I think that like my feelings are a little bit mixed now after a few weeks. At the beginning, I thought, oh, this is looking good, and he's managing the company in a different style, and he's trying to make sure that everyone who works at Twitter actually works at Twitter. I think we'll actually have to see how it all pans out. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting trend, because I think it's this this shift in big tech, right? Maybe away from catering towards this left minority to some extent, which has been dictating the attitude of big tech, the woke left. And I think that the diminishing influence of the woke left in big tech is definitely an interesting trend. So I agree with you here.
All right.
My big trend.
What about you?
Yeah. So my big trend in politics is realpolitik. Yeah. Just realism. So I don't know if you're familiar with like realpolitik and what it means. Basically, it's like a system of like, let's say, political action or political sort of paradigms that are not based on ideology. Basically, it's a type of politics that is just based on practical terms. So normally, part of realpolitik is like balance of power and like responding aggressively towards foreign threats, etc. So I think it's just practical politics rather than politics that are guided by moral or, let's say, ideological considerations. And I think that's unfortunately to some extent the big trend of 2022. I think it's obvious here that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has had immense ripple effects in society at large, specifically in Europe. And I think the most telling thing here is that Germany has decided to increase its military spending a few months ago, like in the summer, I think of 2022. The German parliament, I think, even made changes to the national constitution, allowing it to increase the military budget, which has been unprecedented. Like, I mean, post-World War II Germany has always had a relatively small army for all the different reasons you can think of. And and I think it's really different attitude here, right? So we're really moving into a time where sort of military confrontation is something that people are talking about again. And I think that that's very worrying. Even just sort of this normalization of mentioning or discussing tactical nuclear missiles and things like that. I think it's really shown a change in attitude towards military conflict. And I think it's worrying. But I think it's been the biggest trend. And yeah, I think it's definitely not something that I'm very excited about, but I do think it's an important trend. It's probably also going to have some impact moving into 2023, right? Because ultimately there's a strong correlation between countries that spend a lot of money on the military and that go to war. There's like a clear correlation, like the countries that have the biggest military budget always also tend to be the ones that get more involved in military conflicts. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of like a big trend. And so that's my 2022 trend. My runner-up in politics was the Iranian protester, which I think was like a more, also like a really interesting trend. But so Realpolitik, I think we're heading into like a really different type of, era in terms of international politics. So,
awesome. All right.
Next category, economics. So for economics, my trend was high interest rates. And that's it. I have nothing else to say. I think that high interest rates is the winner of, and like inflation, I guess, which is, the other side of the same coin. So high interest rates is the winner of 2022. No
That's
comment.
Mine too.
Really? Okay.
Yes. I mean, it's what has drove the markets and everything, right? So I was going to mention interest rates and inflation. I mean, inflation and interest rates. I think those two are really tied together. But I totally agree. I mean, anyone who knows what has happened with the markets in the last 12 months, it's all about inflation and interest rate hikes. So
unfortunately,
don't fight the Fed, they say.
Yeah. All right, that was quick. So let's move on. Next category, startups. So, Rui.
Ooh. Yes.
Best startup for 2022.
I decided to choose what's my 2022 startup in terms of growth. I made some research like, okay, if you consider the last 5 years coming up to 2022, which is like the fastest growing startup. And that's my number one. And it's going to be quite controversial, but there is someone that I know that has started using this app. So yeah, it's on the top of my mind right now. And it's OnlyFans.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think, I mean, taking apart all like, I don't know, maybe moral conversations and it's an app it's a startup that it's bringing a lot of attention from,
give a quick summary. What is OnlyFans? For those who don't know.
OnlyFans, so for those who don't know, OnlyFans is basically a platform. It was founded in 2016 in London, the UK. So I think it's still based in the UK. And basically it allows, like, you have content creators, right? Using OnlyFans to basically publish whatever they want. And OnlyFans has found a tremendous market, or I don't know if it's a niche.
What do you mean with anything?
People who... Really? Well, not anything. Of course, there are.
What type of content do you typically find on OnlyFans?
It's open enough if you want to upload like adult content. So like porn. I don't know if it's porn the right word to use, but basically, I mean, you can,
Pornographic
let's say
content,
you decide to pornographic content. That's the word that I was like, erotic content, adult content. And this has been the driving force behind OnlyFans. It generated, so far in 2022, it has generated more than 2.5 billion US dollars in revenue and has a 7 million fan base. So yeah, it has grown close to 9,000% in the last 5 years. Now, what I think it's really interesting, in no way I'm like, promoting creating pornographic content. I am very respectful of how, being lawful, you may do whatever you want with your body. I read some case studies, George, about how these OnlyFans, like open platform for content creators, is allowing so much, especially young people, to generate income through, like, of course, most of it is like, uploading adult content or pornographic content, which it may be really questionable for a lot of people. But just let me give you a case study. So I was reading about this woman in her early 20s, decided to study filming in Toronto, in Canada. She's from Ukraine, so she moved to Canada before the war started. Yeah, so she's studying filming, and at the same time she opened her OnlyFans account, and she is making more than 100K, $100 US a year right now.
Yeah, and I think the top OnlyFans creator has generated like 40 million. Yeah, the top earner is like $40 million in revenue a year. So it's crazy. The scale.
Yeah, and those are the outliers, right?
Yeah, and I think the company.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It's a privately held company, and from what I understand, I'm not sure, but I think that they barely raised any venture capital because most VCs or most investors can't invest in these type of businesses. So I think that the founder actually sort of owns maybe 100% or maybe close to 100%. And I think that they generated $500 million in revenue. So in fees, they take like a small payment fee, basically like a processing fee. So it's a pretty impressive company. Whether you agree with the morality of it is a different question. But yeah, I think that's like that's a very, very good pick. I hadn't thought about this one. Yeah, super interesting pick.
Just to finish with what I think is such an important startup, like lots of people are saying that this is empowering women and young people to be able to create this sort of content and earn money that like a few years ago it was practically impossible. And the funny thing is, like, you mentioned this 14 million US dollars, like outlier case, right? Like the best earner or best performer. But there are thousands of like content creators that whom are earning 50,000, 75,000, 100,000 US dollars per year, which is a pretty good income. And they are still studying in university. So they are earning more money now than what they expect to earn, with their careers in maybe the following 2 or 3 years at least. So really interesting what's doing in that like market. And it came to me because I'm starting Mexico. Guys, we're based here in Mexico. Mexico and lots of countries in Latin America tend to be much more conservative in terms of, values or religiously. But I'm starting to know or to hear about people within our communities that are starting to use OnlyFans. So I think it's really interesting what's happening in terms of like social terms or from a sociology perspective. I think it's really interesting. Go on, George. Sorry.
I'm just going to say slippery slope. Like, I think it's, I think it's such a difficult topic to unpack here, but I think it's a good pick. It's definitely an interesting one. All right, let me tell you quickly about my ones. I think mine are way less controversial, not as interesting, even though, well, I don't know. I had a few different ones. There's one startup that I kind of like. I don't think, so this is like completely my ranking or like my evaluation criteria here is just like vibe based, like like kind of like what startup do I like in terms of like the vibe that it's generating. And One startup is called Stonks, which is kind of a mixture between Twitch and Shark Tank. And it basically allows anyone to do like a live demo day. You're pitching investors, and it has like a few gamification elements, and it helps you generate introductions and even secure investment live during your pitch. So I think that it's just an interesting approach because they are infusing this fundraising process with a lot of fun, with a lot of energy, and it's normally like not such a fun experience for founders to raise money. And I think that they kind of have this attitude of just entertainment, like they're infusing a fundraising process and venture capital with entertainment. So I always like that if someone like is introducing an element into a certain category that normally doesn't have this type of like element to it, I always like that. And I don't know, there's actually a famous Elon Musk quote, which is called, the most entertaining outcome is most likely to succeed. So, and I think that they kind of like have adopted this type of philosophy of, let's just make fundraising entertaining, and that's going to lead to like a good outcome. So I just really like them. And then, so they were kind of my runner-up. But I have to say that AvatarAI.me, Avatar AI from Peter Levels, has to be my kind of like breakout startup. This founder, Peter Levels, I don't know if you know of him. He's an indie hacker, really, really fascinating guy, has like 5 or 6 different companies, and he doesn't have any employees, right? Maybe he has like a few virtual assistants and stuff like that, but he's kind of like never raised venture capital, but is extremely successful as an indie hacker and a solo entrepreneur. And I think he was the first one to basically create a tool to allow you to generate avatars and profile pictures based on machine learning. So you upload 20 or 30 photos, and then you just submit them, and after a few minutes you'll have like your avatars generated. And I think that he kind of was the first one to show how you can use generative artificial intelligence to do something that has like a real life impact, like having like a really cool profile picture generated by artificial intelligence. So he's my winner, Peter Levels and Avatar AI, and we'll put the link also in the show notes. So I think he's kind of the most interesting one for me. And now he obviously has some big competitors, right? There's this one app that's called Lensa that I think has already like surpassed him in terms of users and stuff like that. But I'm still giving him the award because he was the first one. So I feel like he was the pioneer, and that deserves, I think, recognition. So Avatar AI, Peter Levels, it's the best startup of 2022 for me. All right, next category, best investment of 2022. And I'm going to say holding cash and Mexican government bonds, which might come as a surprise. But I feel like
very smart, George.
if you just didn't want to have to worry about anything this year, the best thing for you to do would have been buying bonds. And one really interesting thing are Mexican government bonds, right, which are called CETES. Surprisingly, the Mexican peso has been very, very resilient and has actually gained a little bit of value compared to the US dollar. It used to be maybe $1 used to be 21 pesos, 22 pesos, and now it's down to 19 pesos, and it's stayed there. So the Mexican peso is strong compared to the dollar. And the interest rates that government bonds are paying out at the moment is just insane. We're talking about like 10 to 11% annually. So that would have probably been the best investment. I invested a little bit throughout this year, but into Mexican government bonds. Probably the best move would have been just selling it all and just putting it into those bonds at the beginning of this year. So that's my best investment. That's my winner. Bonds, government bonds. What about you?
I agree with you, cash and Mexican government bonds, because this is not the same for other countries. I mean, the US treasuries have been wildly affected by the hike in interest rates, but Mexican government bonds, maybe Brazilian government bonds are like some of the best performing, because those two currencies have not lose ground against the US dollar. You know, there was like this super US dollar phenomenon. Like we saw the euro getting to parity with the USD and even losing ground to the US dollar. So both the Mexican peso and the Brazilian real have been quite strong. So that has made their government bonds really, really a good investment. Considering more risk, by far the best performing, I think the best performing category or investment that you could find with reason, like not being speculating too much, considering large companies, was oil companies, the energy sector, right? I think that we know that in inflation times, when there is high inflation, commodities tend to perform really well. And for sure, like the energy sector was tremendously successful in 2022. So I'll go with that, with oil companies. Not only oil, I do not recommend like for medium or long-term investors to just buy and hold commodities, but rather investing in companies that in some way or another add value with those commodities, right? I totally agree with you, especially for thinking in terms of having less risk exposure. But for those open for more risk, best performing investment, I think, was oil in general, right? Like energy stocks or the energy sector.
Okay. How do you feel about government interference in terms of like pricing? Because I don't know if you know, in Germany, just today, I believe they released a law basically putting a cap on the price of gas. Do you think that's a trend that's going to continue and is going to affect other commodities as well?
I don't know. I think it's more difficult to see that happen in the US. I think it's easier to expect more of that in Europe, especially because I think Europe has much more pressure because of how dependent they were to Russia in terms of energy. But I think that there is a high risk with that. That's why I was mentioning that this is the sort of investment that has much more volatility and it's such an important part of our economy and making things work. Starting for having heat in the European winter, right? So I think that the risk of having like government interference is pretty high right now. But still, in terms of valuations, a lot of these international oil companies, I think they still have a lot of room to grow in terms of their stock price. And something really interesting, like a lot of investors dumped these energy stocks, especially for companies that were focused on oil extraction or production or, anything related to oil. But lots of these large companies are starting to invest heavily in renewables, in new sources of energy. So potentially, I think that what could happen is that in the next decades, some of these hated oil companies transform into some of the most important renewable energy companies, right? So I think there are really interesting opportunities there.
Okay, interesting. All right. Yeah. So energy companies or how would you term it? Yeah, energy companies. What would have been your best investment for 2022?
And energy stocks. Yeah, energy stocks. Yeah, energy sector. And there are some green energy companies that have also performed really well. Not as good as the oil companies, but still, like anything related to energy has done pretty well in 2022.
Okay. All right, perfect. Interesting. All right, let's move on to our final category. All right, so final category is the momentum trend of 2022. So, Rui, what's your biggest trend of 2022?
That's such a difficult one, George. I think that for me, the biggest trend in 2022 was basically getting out of COVID, going back to normal, right?
Okay. Yeah, the world opening back up in real life.
Yes, going back to normal. I think that's the biggest trend. Let me just explain a little bit more why I think this is a reality. So we know that with the interest rate hikes and credit getting more expensive and recession fears and inflation and all of that. We know that some pretty big important sectors are suffering already, but something crazy. Travel continues to be really hot, really strong. So what we know is that a lot of people around the world, even if they have now a more negative prospect for the future, for the near future, in terms of a recession, losing their jobs, stuff like that, they are still prioritizing traveling, because going back to normal was probably the big thing this year, right? So that's for me the 2022 trend, going back to normal, going back to the open space, traveling again, meeting people, going to concerts. That's for sure what I think was the big trend in 2022.
Love it. Yeah, I was very close to putting that as the big trend as well. It was definitely on my list, and also just reflecting on my personal experience. I mean, I went to Miami in the summer. I played a soccer match with a billionaire, completely dominated, scored 4 goals. Yeah, in real life is definitely back. And then I also went to San Francisco. I was really thinking about for a long time about also going to New York in autumn. So yeah, I agree that in real life is back. I'm not sure if I love it though. I feel like there's now FOMO, especially if you're based in Mexico. I think that I was experiencing a little bit of FOMO, and I was like, oh, there are all these interesting conferences. I would love to go there. And I do think that just the remote world is so much more efficient, because I think that traveling just is such an energy suck, takes away energy, takes away time. But I think it can also be a lot of fun. It can also generate some opportunities. But at the same time, I also feel like it can take away opportunities. I think that there was this unique window of opportunity for tech entrepreneurs in Mexico to just pitch any VC in the world via Zoom, and that was how the world operated. And I actually thought that was an amazing thing. And I see that it's now going back to in real life, also the whole funding process and just raising rounds and stuff. It seems to have, at least that there's now a hybrid model, right? There are some investors who now again prefer to meet in real life. I'm not sure if I actually love it, but it is an important trend. I agree. And so the world opening up again, I totally agree. Important trend. For me, I think it's not going to be such a surprise. It's generative artificial intelligence. That's my big trend for the year. I've mentioned it so many times now, but it has to be.
I agree.
For me, it's just the most excitement is around that. There's real products being built. We are going to see generational companies. And this is not a unique insight or this is not something contrarian or something like that. I think it's pretty obvious that we're going to see generational companies come from this new trend, and a lot of companies that are launched in 2022 will become household names, will have massive impact on every single sector of the economy. And so it has to be generative AI. That's my trend 2022. And just to think about the adoption, I've already used so many different tools. I've used generative art tools. I've used generative chat tools as well. I don't know if you've heard of this one company called Character.ai. Okay, so let me tell you about this. You're going to love it. I'm going to send you the link. We're going to put the link in the show notes, and I'm also going to show it to you later. So it's basically this chat tool where you can, I don't know if it's an app or if it's just a web. I think it's a web-based app at the moment, so they don't have a mobile app. But basically, you go on this app, you select a character, so you can talk to anyone from, let's say, from Joe Rogan to Socrates. You can talk to anyone, and you can just have conversations with them. And Socrates will basically tell you, oh, I'm an ancient philosopher. State a hypothesis, and we'll use the Socratic method to evaluate its feasibility. So, and then you basically can just have a conversation via chat with Socrates or with Joe Rogan, and the things that it's, and it's just really, really impressive. You can basically ask Joe Rogan about like how to launch a podcast, and he'll like basically tell you his story on how he launched. And it seems like most of the information there is actually pretty accurate. So it's a fantastic, really, really exciting technology. So generative AI has to be the trend of 2022.
Okay, love it.
All right.
It's so interesting.
So I think that's it. That's our trends. Hope you enjoyed the show. Let us know what you think. You can find this podcast anywhere on any platform and also on YouTube. So go to the YouTube comments. Let us know what are your trends of 2022. If you agree, disagree, and we'll see you next week.